under Governor Walz's emergency declaration, so we're holding this meeting virtually as opposed to in person. Under the statute, Minnesota Statutes 13D-.021. If people would like to provide comments to us, they can at public.info@metc.state.mn.us. The meeting is also being live streamed and recorded for people to be able to monitor the meeting and see what was decided and what was determined. So with that, can we call the roll to see if we have quorum?
Barber.
Here.
Gonzalez.
Here.
Johnson.
Here.
Lee.
Here.
Lilligren.
Here.
Muse. Ferguson.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you. With that, we have quorum. Are there any adjustments to the agenda of the meeting? All right, seeing none, we will go forward with the agenda that we have. Can I get a motion to approve the minutes of the March 10th meeting?
Lilligren moves approval.
Johnson seconds.
Okay. Any comments, changes? All right, can we call the roll, please?
Barber.
Aye.
Gonzalez.
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
Lee.
Aye.
Lilligren.
Aye.
Ferguson.
Aye.
Thank you.
All right, the motion carries. So we have one business item and two information items on our agenda today. The first item is a budget amendment, business item 2021-57 JT, the first quarter budget amendment. Stuart?
Mr. Chair, I believe OEO is going to start with a quick presentation on one aspect of their amendment.
Okay. If OEO is speaking, we can't hear them.
Hi there, this is Guthrie Byard, the Council's ADA and Title VI Administrator within the Office of Equal Opportunity. Can you hear me?
We can, yes.
Okay. So I apologize for being late to this meeting. So what I wanted to provide this committee is an overview of the ADA improvements that have occurred over the last couple of years, and to provide a review of the work that is outstanding this year and the budget request to be able to complete the ADA improvement projects. So I am not sure who is in control of the presentation, but if you're able to move next slide. All right, thank you. So as far as the background goes, so in order to ensure that the council is in compliance, in particular with Title II of the Americans with Disabilities Act, in 2019, I led an effort to conduct an ADA self-evaluation for the last half of that year, where we brought in a vendor, JQP Incorporated, an MCOM vendor, to actually go to all of our facilities with a level, with with a pen and pad, to be able to review the physical accessibility of our facilities. And each facility received its own report on all of the barriers that were identified. And that led to what's called an ADA transition plan, also a requirement under Title II of the Americans with Disabilities Act that relates to state and local governments. And that ADA transition plan is available on the ADA and Accessibility website within Metropolitan Council's main website. And that is a document that's updated annually that reviews that initial self-evaluation, but in particular, it provides a breakdown of the work that the divisions have done to address and to remediate the barriers. And it also provides a rundown of the goals and the projects that those divisions have set for themselves for that particular year. And so that is nearing completion right now, the update to that document here. When this work first started, there was money that was set aside, nearly $2 million to address any ADA improvement efforts that we had identified. And this also included some digital accessibility efforts as well to make sure that we were brought up to compliance with what's called web content accessibility guidelines with our websites and with our applications. I'll talk a bit more about that here. So if you can move on to the next slide. So just wanted to highlight quickly community engagement. So this didn't operate in a vacuum. We wanted to make sure that we were connecting with community members about this work as it ultimately impacts them. And we wanted to get input from them on how they view the accessibility of our efforts. And for the most part, folks felt as if our work was accessible, that our facilities were accessible, that our policies and our procedures were accessible. We were very appreciative of the feedback that we got. We got nearly 600 comments from both staff and community members. So it was a robust turnout and very informative of our work thus far. So next slide, please. So as I mentioned, each facility received a report, and those report findings were based on a kind of a 1 to 4 scale of significance for that barrier, priority 1 being the most significant. So this is where you're seeing the most public use, the greatest impact to accessing a program or service. Over 3,000 barriers were identified, and priority 3 was the most common severity. So that'd be like the height of a sharps container and needing to adjust the location and the height of that sharps container. It might be off by 2 inches or so. And those reports are what is used by each division, primarily Metro Transit Environmental Services being most public, to prioritize their projects. As it relates to Metro Transit, the findings were also added to their transit asset management database as part of a broader effort to maintain facilities. So next slide, please. A few examples here of barriers that were found, just to give you a sense of the breadth of the barriers found. So one is a faded accessible parking sign. A lot of parking issues were identified at park and rides and transit centers. In this particular case, it's a faded sign that needs to be replaced at the Woodbury Theater Park and Ride. The photo on the right is a photo of some stairs that are a part of the Empire Wastewater Treatment Plant public tour route. So that was a strong emphasis of the self-evaluation, was of that public tour route, as we wanted to make sure that we were identifying that it was a fully accessible route from start to finish. And if not, examples of where it was inaccessible with a request that it be relocated. And so there's efforts underway to identify and do a full review of our routes and where we could relocate them or modify them based on accommodation request for individuals. Next slide, please. Transit barriers found here, some additional barriers here again to provide you with that breadth. So these are at 2 transit facilities. So the photo on the left is of a receptacle that's in the way of the clear floor space that's needed to use the automatic door feature. And so it's in this particular case, we're talking about a lower level barrier where it's a matter of working with public facilities to identify a better location for that receptacle. Photo on the right's a bit trickier because this is about modifying a walkway to address cross slope issues. And so as you see here, it's the curb cut next to an enclosed structure, the shelter, where it's there's built-in lighting there, and so you have electrical concerns there if you were considering moving that facility, and you have the trash receptacle there again, where it's a public facilities issue, but that cross slope poses a concern for folks who are coming from, this is the 38th Street light rail station, who might be coming off of the light rail that is going south towards the airport, and then turning around from that accessible route and trying to enter into the shelter. So that is a concern there, of a higher concern than the photo on the left. Next slide, please. Broadly across the council, just wanted to bullet point some of the work that has occurred using that funding. So there was the ADA self-evaluation. There was also digital accessibility efforts to improve the user and accessibility components of our website. So we had testing done by an organization called WECO, another local MCUB, that provided the testing and the testers of various disabilities, as well as reports on that work. So the Metro Transit website was received a full report, and remediations are being finalized to make sure that that website is digitally accessible. There's also an organizational assessment done of our broader digital accessibility practices. So this would be what training is available for folks around creating accessible documents, where do our document templates reside, how is it being communicated, where those document templates reside, and things like that. In 2020, we then put in place that ADA transition plan, updated the accessibility policy. We conducted, based on the results of that organizational assessment, a pilot of the Minnesota IT Services Accessible Word Document Training, a very robust module-based training that is now required for staff based on various job classes, to try to get that baseline education around document accessibility, which is so very important, especially as these documents make their way to committees, to the council, and make their way onto our websites. Additionally, ADA design training was conducted to environmental services and Metro Transit staff as a follow-up to those reports that were received. Essentially, the point being that we want to make sure that engineering staff, that maintenance staff, are trained on what ADA compliance mean, what design standards mean, what in some cases Minnesota Accessibility Code means, so that way we are implementing going forward in an accessible manner, so we're not having to retroactively address inaccessible items that ultimately can be more costly than just proactively doing the work. Next slide, please. A few examples of Metro Transit work that was completed. So there was some restriping of park and rides, kind of related to the to that photo I showed of the faded accessibility sign. There were truncated domes. That's the tactile, oftentimes yellow pads that are put down on curb cuts to make it more to make individuals who are blind or of low vision more aware of where they are located in relation to our facilities and to our vehicles. We installed several what are called ADA pads. So those are those flat landing surfaces, 5 by 8 feet surfaces next to oftentimes the T sign. So this is where folks are boarding and alighting and making sure that there's a flat surface for individuals. And then in 2020, we updated the pavers at Robbinsdale Transit Center and received designs for modifying the Haywood first floor bathroom that's across from the chambers there, and then installed an accessible route from the Transit Control Center green lot to connect with the rest of the Haywood facility. Next slide, please. And then here's a few photos of the completed ADA projects. So on the left is the Robbinsdale paver project, and then on the right is the installation of an ADA pad along Route 63. Next slide, please. So 2021 work that is to occur. So this is just a floor plan for the Haywood first floor bathroom. So as I mentioned, it's being remodeled to be fully accessible. This is based off of the findings from JQP and that self-evaluation. So there'll be an installation of accessible stalls in both rooms, as well as fixtures that will be ADA compliant, including the sinks and the toilets. And as well as better lighting and ventilation, as those will be in higher use as we start to use the chambers more. Next slide, please. For environmental services, so the work that they completed over the last couple years is primarily around power-assisted door installation and making sure that entrances are accessible. If you don't have accessible entrances, that's a huge issue in being able to access the facilities. Last year in particular did a lot to improve the accessibility of bathrooms, so really identifying bathrooms, especially public bathrooms, as needing to be remodeled, as well as adding in those power-assisted doors. So there was a lot of work across a handful of treatment plants, as well as the main metro plant around that work. So next slide, please. And then for this year, what they're looking to finish up is a lot of that work that they started last year because of COVID. A lot of the work that was started last year was delayed and not able to be completed. And that work started a bit later in 2020 because the self-evaluation was completed at the end of 2019. And so in order to establish these projects, they really didn't get off the ground until springtime. And then again, with COVID, they were delayed. And so this work is looking to be completed this year. And that's with environmental services to finish up the main entrance and the bathroom remodeling efforts. Next slide, please. So the budget breakdown. So again, we were given there was a lot of nearly $2 million to essentially kick off the ADA improvement efforts. And this is kind of a breakdown of the estimated costs for those various efforts and the actual cost. This was for 2019. I want to move on to the next slide. Further breakdown for 2020, this is where kind of the work really started in earnest. And so this breaks down the estimated costs and shows the actual costs. In many cases, it was less than what was estimated to get this work done. But it just shows you in some cases where the effort was a little more costly than in other areas. And just wanted to be transparent about the breakdown of those costs. So next slide, please. 2021, so this is the budget request to complete these projects, as I mentioned. So we're looking to finish their digital accessibility work. So we have some outstanding requests for WECO to do some user and accessibility testing and some consultation as follow-up for our website redesigns and our applications, some additional follow-up design training for environmental services, given their unique work. And then to finish up that first floor bathroom in the FTH building, as I mentioned, they got the designs. And so now it's the construction contract needs to be put into practice here. And then for environmental services, it's to finish the addition of the power assisted doors and the bathroom remodeling that started last year. And next slide. So it's just my contact information. So I'm happy to field any questions right now. And I'm not sure if I did invite Molly Ellis, who is the project manager for the FTH bathroom remodel, as well as the two project managers for environmental services. It's Dan Fox and John Young, in case they are able to answer any specific questions about those projects. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Any questions from council members? Some great work. Councilmember Gonzalez, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Guthrie. I remember the similar presentation to this, I think about 2 years ago, and I believe somebody from JQP was at one of the first EAC meetings that I attended, if I'm not mistaken. And I was impressed by how thorough they were in pointing out issues that may be out of situations of out of compliance with the ADA. So my question is, are the expenses that you just went through, are those related to issues that they discover? And and also the second part is, are there any other issues or improvements that they suggested that still need to be done? In other words, are we following up on their recommendations, and that's the basis of the expenditures? And if there's going to be an endpoint, or if there's going to be more issues coming up due to their recommendations?
Yes and yes. So the
Okay.
yep. So this work is directly tied to the findings from JQP. This is kind of that first phase where they wanted to identify oftentimes the most prominent issues. Again, issues where you have inaccessible entrances to buildings where folks can't access those buildings, very public facing, and so addressing those and packaging those was the initial priority, and the work is ongoing. So as that transition plan is updated on an annual basis, so will the goals for that year. And it's a lot of work. As I mentioned, there were over 3,000 barriers that were identified, and we want to make sure that we're not adding to that list with the work that we're doing. And so that's where that training comes in. That's very critical in kind of finishing up that core training for staff so that they are not only making remediations, but they're making sure that with new construction too, that we're not falling into that same pattern of making some of our efforts inaccessible.
Thank you.
Mary, did you have a comment? You're on mute, Mary.
Thank you. Just a reminder that we use some general fund money to seed getting started on this, kind of a drop in the bucket, but we wanted to get something started. And part of this budget amendment is to finish up using some of that general fund money that we had targeted towards this. But there's an expectation for the operating divisions to put this either in their capital maintenance in the CIP or within their operating budget to continue on this work. So in the budget amendment today, we're kind of finishing up some projects that we had initially started, and we're continuing to work through that list at the operating division level.
Okay, Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I really appreciate this report, and I also really appreciate the comments that Councilmember Gonzalez gave, because I was thinking the same thing. So thanks for that answer as well. And again, I really support this. I know it's a big lift, but to see this, in process and we'll get this work done is a good feeling. So thanks for all your hard work, and really, again, appreciate the report.
Mr. Chair, kind of on that same vein, one of the reasons that I wanted the group to bring this back as we brought this budget amendment is oftentimes we put general fund money into things to get them started, but then we never come back and say, hey, here's what we did with that money. So this is kind of our report back to you about the work that is getting done with that money. Really good work.
Great. Councilmember Lee.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I saw the line item for 88 pads with only $43,000, and my question is, how many pads is that, and how do we decide which stops do we put them at? And then I have one comment about the picture for the handicap sign that was mentioned earlier. I don't have a JD, but I once heard somewhere that those spots are only enforceable if you have both the sign up and the white striping on the ground. And so I'm sure you guys are also gonna redo the white painting on the pavement too. That's it. Thanks.
Council member and committee. So yes, you're right. So in those cases where we've got a faded accessibility sign, we are also looking at that report to see if there's faded painted lines, and making sure, because in some cases the painted lines aren't even faded. It's a matter of whether or not they're wide enough, right? Or the accessible the accessible path next to it is appropriately designated, that the access aisle is appropriately painted and available and it's wide enough. And so that's where you get into conversations about packaging it. So if you're identifying that you need to change out some signs, also looking to see if there's some restriping and painting that is needed. To your question about the ADA pad installations, that's a unique one because as you see with the 2020 budget breakdown, the actual cost was zero. They identified other sources of funding for that. And my recollection is that they've been able to install about 70 or so since the self-evaluation was completed, 70 individual ADA pads. I couldn't tell you exactly the individual cost. You know, it would likely change based on location. But that is an element of the Better Bus Stops program that is occurring. So mentioned Route 63 as a example of that Better Bus Stops program, where in addition to other improvements being made, they're also adding in ADA pads based on availability. And so in some cases, it's based on the number of limited mobility tags, so as well as lift deployments. And so as you might imagine, a flat landing surface doesn't just benefit somebody who, you know, has a mobility disability, but benefits somebody using a stroller, for instance.
Councilmember Barber?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't know for sure how many ADA pads, but as Guthrie highlighted pretty well, we've been doing a lot of that work through our Better Bus Stops program, really taking a keen eye to it. And as a result of some of this work that was done a few years ago, one of the big things we've done is really proactively engage our TAC committee. Looking at not only what we have historically, but as we're doing all this new construction, what do we need to factor in from an accessibility perspective? And I think that is improving things as we're building things out and is helping us figure out so that we don't have to go back and retrofit things further, but we can build smarter into the future.
All right, any other comments from council members? No. All right, Stuart, you're back up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon. My name is Stuart McMullen. I'm Director of Budget and Operations, and I'm bringing forward the first quarter 2021 budget amendment. With me and available to answer questions are Heather Augustin-Hebner, Finance Director for CD and MTS, and Ed Petrie, Finance Director for Metro Transit. This amendment makes changes to the operating budget in regional administration, the operating and capital budget in MTS and Metro Transit, and the capital budget in community development. The proposed amendment was reviewed and approved by the Transportation Committee this past Monday, March 22nd, and will be reviewed by the Community Development Committee on April 5th. First, as in support of the work just described by Guthrie, funds for physical and digital accessibility projects in Metro Transit and environmental services will be added to OEO's regional administration budget. These funds will come out of reserves as part of the 2000 allocation made by the council for this purpose. Next are the changes in the operating budget for the transportation programs. Metro Transit will be bringing in local revenues from Ramsey County for staff work on the Rush Line project. MTS will be moving $1.4 million in MVES funds from the operating to the capital budget and $1.4 million in federal funds from the capital to the operating budget. This will allow for the funding of capital projects in contract services that cannot be funded with federal or bond proceed dollars. Turning to the changes in the transportation capital budget, the amendment adds or changes the funding for 20 projects and closes 9 projects in Metro Transit. It also changes the funding for 30 projects, closes 41 projects, and adds 7 projects to the MTS capital budget. The individual changes are listed in Table 9 of the amendment. In the community development capital budget, the amendment makes changes to 3 regional parks projects, closes 55 projects in the community development ACP, and reallocates funding for 58 parks projects. These changes are listed on Table 11 of the amendment. The motion is the Metropolitan Council authorizes the 2021 unified budget as amended and in accordance with the attached tables. With that summary, we could answer any questions the committee might have.
Are there any questions from committee members? All right, seeing none, can we get a motion to approve business item 2021-57 JT?
Moved by Barber.
Is there a second?
Lilligren seconds. Lilligren seconds.
Moved by Barber, second by Lilligren. Any other questions or comments? All right, seeing none, can we call the roll?
Barber,
Aye.
Gonzalez,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Lee,
Aye.
Lilligren,
Aye.
Ferguson.
Aye.
Thank you.
All right, and the motion carries, and that is our only business item for today. So we have two probably lengthy or somewhat lengthy information items. The first one is our advancing equity in the budgeting of the dollars that we had set aside for that. Mary?
Mr. Chair, we're going to go with Marie on this one.
Okay.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. There is an attachment of this information item of summarized the total for advancing equity in the region to use the general purpose levy in equity investments around transportation, reducing racial disparity, housing, and sustainability. The total investment currently is the $5.6 million. This number includes $300,000 to help with some temporary help, especially around some of the initiatives of hiring for the youth skill programs and for the transportation maintenance technical training. And the funding of this source is the 3.9 that we've talked about. And then taking from our general fund reserves, the 1.7 to come up with a total investment for our community of that 5.6 million. I've outlined on that information item the topics that we've talked about over the last few meetings, what that would be used for that funding, how success will be measured, and I fully anticipate that if these are all approved, just like what we did with the presentation with the budget amendment, we would bring forward in the middle or near the end of their cycle to be accountable back to you of how we've spent this money. And then each of the sponsors of these projects are listed. So I think at this point, open it up to the floor probably for discussion and see if these are the projects that we would like to move forward for 2021. And each one does have a time frame listed too. Some do go out 18 months to 2 years to get enough runway to complete these projects.
Council members have any questions either on projects funded or not funded or dollar amounts? Or any things they would like to have added to the commitments around what work will be done for clarification? Let's just start with the first one. Any comments on advancing equity in the region through contracting? Anything we're missing?
Mr. Chair, can I?
Yep, Councilmember Gonzalez.
So I'm just looking at we had discussed this particular items and the allocations and all of that. I'm just wondering if what we're doing right now with this is basically just setting a baseline as to whether the amounts and or the specific projects do indeed move the needle. I mean, I don't know if $600,000, for example, for contracting is going to be enough or not to be significant. Is that part of what we are wondering? If
It is.
those particular, okay. So the idea is just to get some data and see what happens and then revisit all of this at a later point. Is that my understanding?
Probably won't revisit numbers until this time next year.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
So if you don't think that that's enough money, then now would be the time to bring that up.
Mr. Chair.
Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you. And I know it's buried in the details and we've talked about this, but just in the overview here, again, on the success and measurements, will be project data to be measured and reported, including women BIPOC owned businesses participating, contract dollars distributed to MCUBs in excess of established goal. And so please remind me, do we have goals established with this, not just our regular goals, but like by investing the 600,000, have we set the new benchmark of, what we are hoping to see, so that we can measure, we can report out what happened, but then did we set new goals to see if we really reach those goals, or what do we see would be success in this? Those are just, again, I think I keep, I'm kind of on the same thing, but I'm just trying to make sure that if we invest it, we get some things that happen good. How do we know if we're being successful, and how do we know if it's sustainable and it will play forward?
Yeah, and I would just say, I think, so goals and targets are maybe two different things. So maybe targets might be a better way to put it. So goals sort of have a formal definition in DBE programs, but I think it would make sense to set targets. We've never set a target for BIPOC, for example, which is separate from setting a goal. The goal cannot be race-based, but we could have an internal target of something we're monitoring. But we've never had a recommendation from OEO on what that target would look like.
Well, I want to make sure that, to your point, we want to do this in the right way. I just think that for me, on the backside of all this, did we accomplish what we were trying to accomplish at the levels that we had hoped we would get? And so if that's a target or whatever, and it's okay to set something like that. I mean, I'm not opposed to this. I just always want to know, what is success in our minds? And when we look at the numbers, and then, are we confident, that we can continue to roll this forward so that when the money goes away, we still have some outcomes that we are trying to achieve. So it's more or less just my mindset on this, so that on the backside of this, we go, okay, we not only did what we targeted to do, or pick the word, but we beat it. And we're finding that these contractors are really now embracing this. Those would be the kinds of things that I'm looking for.
Yeah, and I think the challenge we also have is if we're advancing more racial equity, right, we could accomplish all of these and not move the racial equity needle one bit, right? So that's sort of the common problem. It's been the problem in Minnesota for 40 years, right? So
absolutely, couldn't agree more. Thank you.
So
and I don't think this changes that per se.
Right. Mr. Chair and committee members, I think we're trying out some things in a pilot, and we look at this and we say, do we get the outcomes that we were hoping for of that pilot? And if we get those outcomes that we're hoping for, then we have a budget decision to make in the future about how do we want to continue this program, because we see it as being successful. So I think it gives us the information to make a educated decision about a future budget.
Any other
Chair.
thoughts? Yep.
Chair, council
Go ahead,
members, this
Seth.
is Cy Jordan, Director of Equal Opportunity. And so, Councilmember Johnson, I do want to be responsive to your question with the request for the item number 1. We'll be able to measure growth between the goal that we do set on an individual product or project or goods and services and how far the contractor goes above that goal. So we'll be able to have that as a measure of whether or not we want to continue those kind of incentives. For the second item, it will be dependent upon the experiences of the apprentices and their success and the contractor's experience as well, which the Workforce Development Unit will work with those contractors on. For the third item, the Office of Equal Opportunity is using this as it is one-time funding. And so based upon our limitations and capacity for the remainder of 2021, that is the amount we're requesting to set up that development office that will move us into that work planning that will set those targets and focus areas for growth and opportunity and reducing the racial disparity gap. Thank you.
And Mr. Chair, if when we get the data back, so thank you, Cy, for that. That's great. And I'd like to see previous years before this pilot project so that we can compare if contractors were exceeding the goals before, not probably to the degree we would want if they're not even meeting them or exceeding them, but those are the things that I just want to be able to see in the future so we can just track that progress. To your point, Mary, then we've got we're armed with good data to show, hey, this was a good investment, or hey, it was a it marginally moved the needle, right? So that's all I'm trying to find. And I really appreciate all of staff's work on this. Thank you.
Yeah, the tricky part will be is it may be if we award it on one contract, if that contractor doesn't do anything, does that mean that the whole concept doesn't work? Or if that contractor does amazing work, does that mean every contractor will do amazing work? Right. Either way, I think that the challenge that I had earlier was just in trying to do it only on one contract is, anytime you're trying to figure out if something's working or not, having an N of 1 is creates a significant amount of error in that conversation. So,
Mr. Chair, to
Go
that point, would not to get in the weeds and make life horrible for staff, but would before the determination of where that money goes, would it come back to management for us to say, hey, here's the 1 or 3 or 5 or whatever, here's what we're looking at using this money for, given contracts coming up? Would we be able to see that to kind of go, yeah, instead of 1, it could go over here to of several, or once we've locked in, it kind of meets a criteria and a prioritization that is kind of out of our hands?
That's a good question. I don't know. Cy, how are you going to determine which contract you're applying that to? Or Jody?
Sorry, Chair, council members, I need to find my mute button. The Office of Equal Opportunity will be working closely with procurement to make that determination, and that is certainly a position that we can take in bringing that back to before we actually apply it to a particular project or contract as we're moving forward in both setting the goal for the project and then making a decision on applying this particular incentive to that project. Jody? Any further comments?
Finding my unmute button. Mr. Chair and council members, I absolutely concur with Cy that we can continue to provide information to the management committee as we learn more information again about the upcoming projects, and then absolutely have those conversations with the business units to find out which projects have a significant amount of opportunity so that not only all the contractors succeed, but also that the project is a good fit for it and we have that outcome that we're looking for. So we can commit to you to continue to keep you informed of what the status is as these projects move forward. And we're really excited for this opportunity.
Yeah, it might be useful to look at contracts where in the past where, maybe one vendor bid at, they said they could hit a 20% goal and someone else said they'd hit a 5% goal, where there's so that way then you could see if that's enough to encourage people just because they run their businesses differently, right? They have a different, so that would just be a thought of the type of contract that would make the most sense.
Yeah, Mr. Chair and committee members, I absolutely concur, and I see Lisa's on here as well. And we'll just continue to partner with the business units, especially both engineering departments, to make sure that we have the right projects for this as well, and some subcontracting opportunities, and just some opportunities to make sure that we get, again, the outcomes that we are looking for.
Okay. Any other comments on this business, on this part of it?
Just briefly, if I can.
Go ahead,
Mr.
Francisco.
Chair. Appreciate the conversation, and of course, we all know that we have at least myself, and I speaking for Chris Ferguson, is that we do have an interest in issues of contracting, and without trying to get in the way of staff, I would really like to see, and that's just for me to understand the weeds and the mechanics of how this works. If we can get like a case sample or one of the projects or contracts that we're thinking of putting through this process, if we can take that from, this is the project, these are the criteria, this is how we are evaluating, have like a live example of one of these situations, how would that work? So I can understand how staff analyzes and approves this. So I hope that makes sense. I just want to get to know more about the mechanics of how this works. And I'm just thinking that this could be an opportunity to do that.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, Council Member Gonzalez, absolutely. Cy and I can partner with that to give you just a sliver of a mystery behind the process so that you understand from initiation and all the different pieces that go in through bid submittal to evaluation all the way up to award. And I think it's just a great opportunity to talk about, what's happening to help everyone understand roles and responsibilities so we can get to that outcome. So I hear you, and Cy and I will work together to coordinate a presentation that has that information.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Another one I'll make more work for you is just that we have that particular interest. So thank you very much.
And it'll probably take a little bit of work just to advertise that opportunity for people because it's not part of our standard bid package as well. So, all right. Any other final comments on this one? All right. The second one, I think we all know well. It's simply adding additional funding to our local housing initiatives account. As you can tell, that is more than the total amount we were talking about before. We decided to take additional money from general fund reserves and apply it to this program so that we could adequately fund or properly fund what they were requesting before to be able to put in this program. So that one I think is fairly simple. But any questions on that one? The third one is Environmental Services Job Skills Program. Any questions on that? That one, I think everybody liked that concept. So. The next one is the equity evaluation of regional transit investment. So this one, just one thing to note, it's a little bit less money than they were originally requesting, but a piece of work that I think there's a number of people that felt we should move up in the timeline and get it started this year, just given the impact that it has on a lot of other things that we do at the council. The next one was the maintenance technical training, which we have in essence, I think, done something similar before with great success. So this is having another cohort of people. Remember, these were the ones that we looked at whether or not it was possible to do more because people like these concepts, and the challenge is just really to manage the number of people coming through the program and the opportunities that would be available when people would be getting ready to graduate. And so wanting to match those up, and I think Brian Funk and others picked a number that that we would ensure that we would have jobs available for people as they come in. And then the last one that we have on the list is expanding multicultural marketing reach and frequency. And so this is one that I think we actually added a little bit to just the of things that we wanted them to work on, but leveraging some of our Metro Transit assets and just broadly combining that with some of our with our various components of some of the other racial equity work that we want to do. And so using not just doing it more broadly, thinking about how we want to market in this space and do some of this communication. So that might be one. Just read if there's things that we're missing that people brought up in the last session. Let us know, and we can add them to the thought of the list.
So, Mr. Chair, I think the next steps for this will be to bring it to the council as a recommendation from the management committee. It requires a budget amendment as well because we're proposing using some reserves to transfer to the pass-through account. So that's probably our best way of bringing it forward to the council and talking about it. Would you like at the council for us to do any further presentation of these items?
I think it would be good to try to do like a one slide, if we can, presentation to let people know some of the special projects that we're working on.
Yeah, really focusing on the outcomes.
Yep. Yes, absolutely.
Great. We can certainly do that.
And Mr. Chair,
Councilmember Johnson.
2 things. I know I've asked this before. I just keep asking things because I forget what I ask sometimes. But and all of this is going through the Equity Advisory Committee as well, right? We're all in line with their support and input, and to amplify what we're doing here. And I think you said we took into consideration their insights before we came up with this, or could you just remind me what their role is? And then my second point is for the council meeting where we bring this up. Yeah, 1-pager. I agree with the chair, and then maybe just a really nice bullet pointed stuff for Mr. Chair to answer all the questions if we get them. Because this is a lot of work and a lot of lift, and I really do appreciate it. There's a lot of detail in this, so some people might have questions, but I do appreciate this.
I will let Councilmember Gonzalez talk about the Equity Advisory Committee and how this fits in with their work.
My understanding is that we did discuss this. Some of the, I don't recall, Sai, if you did a presentation or how was this brought before the EAC?
Sai, if you're speaking, you're on mute.
We lose Sai?
I will say that my recollection is that we did discuss several of the individual projects. I'm trying to recall, and my apologies for not remembering exactly what happened, but I seem to recall that we had presentation either by Cerinthia or somebody from staff on the idea when it first came up. And I have discussed this with Nalima Sitate Menene, the co-chair. But again, I don't recall, Sai, if additional steps were taken to get the input from the EAC or not.
Well, it seems she's having some technical difficulties. It might be good for us just to close the loop.
Yeah.
If we talked about some of these things with them, it might not have been the finalized list. So it might be helpful for us to close the loop and talk about where we're focusing these funds.
Mr. Chair?
Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you so much. I really do appreciate closing the loop. You know, it's a great group of people. They've got some new members coming on, you know, changing of the guard, so to speak, with Nalima moving off. But, you know, I think that if now is not the time to really fully engage that group and consistently keep them in line with what we're doing and what they're doing, I don't know when the time would be. So I appreciate that. And thank you, Councilmember Gonzalez, for your leadership with that group. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Councilmember Barber, did you have something? Sorry. Councilmember Gonzalez, do you have another comment?
Oh, just briefly. What I will do is I'll reach out back to the EAC members and have a conversation. We don't have a meeting scheduled until next month, so we'll do some you know, online discussion, and if there's any questions, I will bring it back to this group or to the council.
Great.
Mr. Chair.
Councilmember Barber. Yep.
Oh, I'll go after Councilmember Barber. Thank you.
Councilmember Barber, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As this goes forward, I will support this. I do want to point out something that I still do have concerns about the LHIA funding, and a little bit even more now that we're pulling money from the general fund reserves. We did that when we funded the program, for this year, we put some additional money in there. And if we do this again next year, I would like to see that happen with the act that the work through the Community Development Committee, outlining that program going forward, because to me, this money out of the general purposes levy is our chance to impact change with new things, just to see, like we talked, there's a lot of innovation built in here and ways for us to try things on to see if we want to fund them in the future. You know, that was how the mechanics program was initially developed. It was through an equity grant through this type of funding, and it worked, and so we funded it, you know, through division budgets going forward. And so, you know, to me, like I said, I will, when we're talking about this, the full council, I will support this. But I think, you know, we should look at this when we're planning both the Livable Communities program next year and the budgeting timing of how this works. If that's a priority, we can fund it as part of that. And so, especially when we're pulling from reserves. So just a comment, but I will support all of this going forward. But this is our chance to innovate and try things. And I don't feel like just putting money into an existing program is necessarily innovation.
Any other thoughts or comments? All right. Thank you all. I think we will we'll proceed with the list that we have and then bring that as a budget amendment to council.
Mr. Chair, sorry.
Councilor Johnson, sorry.
So does this go to community development then? Since it's, you know, to Councilmember Barber's point, would it go to that group and then go to the Met Council, the full Met Council? I mean, because we, you know, and we have our chair of community development with us, Councilmember Lilligren. I mean, we really did have some robust discussions even about our funding this year and what we were trying to do. And there are changes to some of our programs as it relates to equity outcomes. So that is very good. And, you know, we all know there's never enough money to close the gaps for all of the projects that are in line. But I do appreciate Councilmember Barber's comments about trying to innovate and spark some new ideas around this. So I don't know, I don't chair that committee, but I just think that the point was well taken, Councilmember Barber, when you mentioned maybe it should loop through community development. Because boy, do we have a lot of discussion there about stuff like this. But, you know, I just wanted to throw that out there.
Mr. Chair and committee members, I see this one coming from Management Committee directly to the council.
Yeah, and Mr. Chair, thanks, Mary, and thanks, Councilmember Barber, for bringing this up. And there has been a really intensive look through the Housing Policy Work Group and with the involvement of the Community Development Committee. It's been two kind of points where this is, I think, is really hitting. One of them is on innovation, and I'm glad you brought that up. And actually, the sense of the work group was that LHIA account is a good spot for innovation projects. And so I think you'll see more of that kind of coming forward through the work of the housing policy work group. And the other is just about production and how the market is behaving as housing production ramps up, and that affordable end of the market is not ramping up at the same pace. And so this was the thinking behind increasing LHA is informed, I think, by what's happening in the market. And I hear you, Councilmember Barber. I think it's important that we keep this on our radar, and if it is a priority, figure out how to bring it into the budgeting process.
Okay, Mr. Chair and committee members, our commitment to you as well is to come back and report on progress on these and whether we're reaching the outcomes that we put this innovation money towards. So, thank you.
Thank you. All right, any other comments on the advancing equity in the region package? All right, does somebody have a motion for me?
Mr. Chair, I move that we close this meeting under Section 13D.03 Subdivision 1 of the Minnesota statutes, so we can consider a labor development and negotiation related to labor strike